Travis Severance. I own Millennium Games in Rochester, New York. I've been in game store retail since 2002. We're 11,000 square feet. We have board games, card games, role-playing games, miniature games, disc golf, comics. We kind of do it all. We got a little over 2,800 unique board games on the floor right now. So if you're in the area, come check us out.
Hi, I'm Mike Webb. I'm the Vice President of Marketing, Data, and Customer Service with Alliance Game Distributors. I'm also a Director-at-Large with the Game Manufacturers Association. Alliance is the largest hobby game distributor in the U.S. with about 28,000 items in warehouse.
I didn't talk about unique items. I just said board games. We've got more unique Magic cards.
And we're also the publisher of Game Trade Magazine, as well as the parent for Game Trade Media, which is online as well as streaming video productions for the game industry.
Hi, I'm Justin Ziran, president of WizKids Games. WizKids is the largest manufacturer of pre-painted miniatures. We also manage a platform called HeroClix, and more recently entered into board games. And probably why I'm here.
Probably. I'm Scott Gaeta. I'm the president of Renegade Game Studios. We don't have 28,000 SKUs.
Yeah.
We're not the biggest, but we put out some pretty nice.
Tom Vasel, the president of the Dice Tower. We have 28,000 videos. No, not quite. We haven't actually reached 10,000 yet. But we talk a lot about board games, podcasts, videos, anything about or board games, but also people who play them.
Very cool. And as I said, I'm Rick with Game Trade Media. But let's get into some questions. We're going to have you guys come up and ask some questions too later on in the panel. But let's just start it right off. And again, I'm going to start back down there with Travis with how do you think 2017 was for the board game industry, and what are your projections and expectations for 2018?
I'm gonna approach all these just from the retail chair, and I'll say for retail, it's kind of the best of times and worst of times. We've got a big, giant, massive store, and most of the stores aren't as large as mine is in the country. And from a consumer standpoint, the board game industry is enormous now. You guys have this massive amount of choice and selection and quality, and the best board games we've ever seen ever. And that's a wonderful thing. But if you have the pressure of owning a retail store and you're looking at, some weeks as many as 30 to 50 different options for new releases, not counting the stuff that comes in through the crowdfunding channels and stuff, and you have to make decisions on buying for a brick-and-mortar location, it's challenging. It's challenging to decide which ones you're going to buy. Are you going to bring them all in? And the last thing that I want to do is disappoint a consumer that comes in wanting a specific game. So it's a lot harder than it was 17 years ago. If we had 6 releases in a month, it was a lot, and I could spend a whole ton of time taking a look at all those different board games and getting really intimately familiar with that. And that's almost impossible to do now. So while there's a giant swath of offers out there, being able to spend the amount of time that we need to be able to curate a shopping experience that's going to be valuable to you. I don't want to put anything on my shelf that you guys would buy and think this is a terrible game. So without being able to try all of them out, sometimes I have to just rely on the quality of the product or the quality of the designer or games that are in that category that have done well for us. So it's a wonderful and terrifying thing to be able to go through all at the same time. So that's kind of where we're at.
Very cool. And Mike from Alliance, where's your opinion
Sure.
on all this as well?
I think Travis hits a point. Best of times, worst of times. Obviously, I think for those of us that are involved in board gaming and in the board game hobby, the mass awareness of our side of the market, the awareness, the number of people that when you say a board game, Life doesn't pop in their head first, Catan pops in their head first, or Ticket to Ride, or Fuse, or so many different games. I think that's at an all-time high, and that can't help but be good for us. I think 2017 was a record-breaking year in many, many ways. The quality and production values of the games that are out there are unmatched. I think we're going to talk a little bit later about some things like the crowdfunding platforms that have helped some of that happen. At the same time, I think the breadth in genres and styles of play between party games and cooperative games and crunchy strategy games, I think that's at an all-time high. At the same time, production and the number of products that are coming into the markets at an all-time high. I think we're heading towards an equilibrium, which means there's going to be some shakeouts over the next year. I think 2018 will be a year where we see that equilibrium start to balance out. But I think that we've got some excellent opportunities there. Speed of information flow primarily, trying to make sure that customers are getting the information about products so that they can make some choices about what's coming out. That helps everyone else in the business chain be able to adapt, for publishers to print the right amount, for distributors to stock in the right amount, to be able to make sure that product reaches store shelves and consumers.
Very good. Thank you. Same question, actually, for Justin and Scott. I want to get everybody's opinion on this down the line, because they're coming to us from every aspect of the industry. We've got, like we already said, retailer, distributor, publisher, media. So we want to get this answered by everybody. So if you could just bring it on down.
So, WizKids was in a unique situation on the outside looking in on board games. But the growth of the industry was so phenomenal, it became hard to ignore the category. So as a miniatures company, we stepped in and sort of became part of the problem, because there's just opportunity to make money, opportunity to deliver games to the people, in the crowd, the consumer. I think the year was great. I think the 2018 looks good, but I think there's a reckoning coming in that there are so many games right now that one of the challenges is, how does a manufacturer break through and tell you about the games that we're doing? Tom does a great job of parsing information and parsing thousands of titles and saying these are good titles, but there aren't those mechanisms in place. Not professional mechanisms. There aren't the variety of mechanisms to do that, like in the video game industry. You are very much seeing a cottage industry transform into a very professional industry filled with bigger players, and Kickstarter too. And I think as we go through the next couple of years, it'll be interesting to see how everything changes and equalizes, like Mike said.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think in 2017 for us, I mean, we saw tremendous growth, specifically for our company. We put out some titles that really took off. We've had some titles that have really kind of stuck and established themselves that are just really consistent over the last 3 years. But I think everybody already touched on this. The biggest challenge from a publisher's perspective is marketing and getting your game out and allowing the consumers, letting you guys know that we even have a game that's you might like. There's so many things out there for you to choose from, and I think choice is good. Like, as a board game fan, like, this is the best it's ever been, right? Like, there are so many choices and so many good games. It's an embarrassment of riches. But from a publisher's perspective, it's very competitive, and we have to work twice as hard just to let you guys know what we even have to offer. And, things like the Dice Tower and Game Trade Media and things like that really do help us, because it helps get the word out, and it provides resources for consumers to try to make those decisions. But that's probably the biggest part of the industry that we're focused on, is how do we get our message out there, and how do we let you guys know how awesome our games are, or at least give you the information that you need to make a choice.
Yeah, I agree with everybody so far. It's definitely been, I think it's been a phenomenal year, and there definitely is more choices than ever, and they're all very good choices. Okay, let me rephrase that. Many of them are very good choices. We'll point out the others sometime. But there's just so many. Back in the day, when Days of Wonder first came on the scene, and a Days of Wonder game, you looked at that game and said, wow, this is a step above everything else. Now that is expected.
That's the bar.
Has to look like that,
At least.
or else you think it's not very good at all. And not even the quality of games. There's definitely, you'll meet people who will be nostalgic about the good old days. Those days suck compared to what we have now. You have hundreds of good games that come out every year. Back then you were lucky to get even 10. And that's, again, good and bad. And it's causing there to be an upswing in both the professional media reviewers we're having our own hands full, because we're transferring something that was a hobby at the beginning, and now we're trying to make it more professional, but also groupthink from Board Game Geek to Reddit to other sources, where you can live or die by how popular your game is on those, because it needs to rise above the crowd. The hotness bar on the side of Board Game Geek matters. It probably shouldn't, but it does, because that's the game. Then you look there and you say, other people like this, I will too. and that matters way more in 2017 than it did
Yeah,
before.
I think everybody's struggling, right? Like on the consumer level, everybody's struggling to parse this information. So those shortcuts, like the hotness list on the BGG, on the BGG homepage is a shortcut, right? It's like I got a million choices as a consumer. What should I look at first? Well, that's a nice shortcut. I can just look at that list and maybe check those games out and see if any of them are for me.
And top lists, they're somewhat might be our bread and butter, but people like those because it's like there's so many things. Just tell me the best.
Right.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. Our next question is going to start here with you, Tom. So in the years past, we all know that a year has had a theme. The year of the zombie games, the year of the whatever. 2017, what would you think its theme was? Was it mechanic? Was it genre? Was it cats? And what do you think the theme? So yeah,
Like
2017.
to state definitively, not cats. Maybe it's the theme of adventure. We're seeing Seventh Continent be so popular. Gloomhaven, there are 2 Kickstarters that have almost transcended. Their own legacy style game. Legacy games themselves are a sense of adventure. The escape room genre where the theme matters. I know every time I say that on my show, people are like, oh, it matters, okay? And it matters whether it's just based on a beautiful box cover, but I think we're seeing more of that sense of adventure. People want to play a board game and they come back talking about the stories that game did. There are still great mechanically sound games that are doing well, but we're seeing this theme, right? The trading in the Mediterranean trope and the zombie trope I complained about so much, that's kind of gone by the wayside at this point. And I'm not sad.
So, Travis, in regards to theme, have you seen is it regional? Is it all over the board as far as like?
So
You see something
I really thought that we were going to see more legacy games hit the shelf this year. Just based on the success of Pandemic Legacy and Risk Legacy and stuff like that. Seafall kind of crashed post-Gen Con last year and didn't get as much run as I thought it probably should have. It was a little slow compared to the other ones. I thought Charterstone would have been out by now. But if I look back 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, and I would have thought that a category where you were going to experience a game over a certain course of hours and then throw it in the garbage was going to be a viable thing, I would have thought you were crazy, because I've got a copy of Puerto Rico that I've played the cover off of, different things like that. But it speaks to kind of the pacing of the industry now, where like how many of us have closets at home with 100 games of which we've played once, or we've punched out the pieces and we put it back in the closet and different things like that. So now, because you've got this, instead of just having that one experience, now you have this kind of built-in driver that makes you bring it through, but at the end of the thing, you're going to just toss it out like a comic book or something like that. I guess comics are a bad example.
Yes, bad example.
Yeah, sorry.
Throw all your comics away so mine are worth more.
Right, yeah. I mean, but I'm the guy that buys the trades instead of the weeklies, So yeah, I would say legacy was important. Was an important theme this year. A couple of years ago it was definitely deck builders, and you see kind of these genres explode and then go for a little bit, and then we move on to whatever the next thing is. But for us, in terms of sales-wise, simplicity is what's been doing really well. Simplicity, and then the other side of that is it seems like millennials really enjoy the social aspect of stuff. They don't want to get into necessarily a grindy Feast of Odin experience. They'd rather explode kittens or make a meme or call it a day, something that they can get 20 people together, play for a half hour, and then go on to something else. So our sales have been more those party games that, like, some people, we wouldn't even consider them games. They're more of a social experience, but that's where the sales have been. The legacy stuff's done well, too. But I don't think that, and we sold a lot of cat games, too. So cats are actually,
I think cats will always be there.
Yeah,
They'll
I
always
have
be
a
on the
display
top.
at the store that's an end cap that's just cat games. So
In our experience,
there's 20 of them.
cats unfortunately outsell dogs about 5 to 1.
Sad, I'm a dog person, so it's tough.
Very cool. All right, so now I'm going to ask for some audience participation. In the last 6 months, who in this room has backed the Kickstarter? By show of hands, yes, please. In the last month, who has backed the Kickstarter? Who plans on backing a Kickstarter next year? All right. So based on that information, gentlemen, what are your thoughts on Kickstarter? and the effect or influence on the board game industry and its future based on this information. I want to start with Mike, please.
Okay.
And hit
That's
the,
a safe pick.
hit the center first, and then we'll talk with Tom and
All right. I think it's undeniable that crowdfunding in general, obviously Kickstarter and other platforms that are out there, have had a tremendous impact on this business. I look back at Zombicide's kind of the one that always pops into my head. Apologies there. But Zombicide pops into my head because here's a game that prior to Kickstarter could have been another game with punch-out counters that came and went, maybe became a little bit of a new classic. But the level of production quality of the game really kicked up the expectation for players across a lot of product lines. And I think what we've seen with Kickstarter is there's a lowering of the barrier to entry, and there's a certain degree of concern that can come, at this table by that, but at the same time, it's increased the expectation of what a game experience should be. From this side, there's a lot of people that expect me, because I'm involved in distribution, to be more concerned about Kickstarter. The fact of the matter, I think there are many things that many publishers, including publishers here and publishers that are on the exhibit hall floor, can do and do to have retailer-friendly Kickstarters, because doing a Kickstarter on the front end and creating the game, funding the game so that you can produce it at a very high quality, that's great. A lot of those games can't have a long tail, and they can have a long tail in retail, and there's certainly, I think, some success stories there. So, from the Kickstarter aspect, I welcome it. I think it's played a big role in the quality of games that are coming out. Some of the games that are coming out that are very high dollar, but also very high quality. I'm a miniatures guy. I got into this business from playing miniature games back in the day. So I love when I get my board game, and the first thing I do is open it and prime the figures and paint them. From my aspect, I absolutely love it. I think it's had a lot of very strong positives, and I think a lot of the negatives are starting to balance out a little bit, and we can look for ways to make them more friendly to long tail sales and evergreens.
Now, Justin, same question for you, and but I also want to ask you this: has WizKids ever ran a Kickstarter?
So I think we did. When we had a video game arm, we ran a small Kickstarter, but it was nondescript, and it was for a video game, so I think it's kind of out of scope.
Sure.
But I think I have a unique perspective on Kickstarter. There's two issues. One, I look at Kickstarter as a challenge, in that I'm primarily a non-Kickstarting company. How do I compete with the amount of content in that Kickstarter box? So manufacturers have to make a little bit of money. The retailer has to make a little bit of money. What that means is I have to keep my costs down in order to keep everybody in this chain happy.
You can give something to me.
On Kickstarter, you don't have this chain. You have a manufacturer and a consumer. And it's not rocket science to make it work. Honestly, the hardest part about one game is shipping it around the world. Everything else is getting a good design and doing that. So there is, how do we compete and innovate and make our games better in order to compete with the Kickstarter challenge? That being said, I think it's also a side effect of there's so many good games and so many good things out there for the consumer. The manufacturers can't handle that volume of game content coming to us and getting that to you. So Kickstarter is kind of the end around, and that's a good thing for the consumer. It's challenging for some of us up here, but ultimately, in a free market, I think it drives competition and innovation.
Scott, same question to you before you answer the Kickstarter one. Has Renegade ever ran a Kickstarter?
No, we've never run a Kickstarter, though we've acquired a few games that were run on Kickstarter, and then we picked them up after the Kickstarter. Probably the first one that we did was most popular was Lanterns. So the story behind that was I saw the game on Kickstarter and I really liked it. Just from the video I saw, it looked like it had potential and probably would have been something I wanted to publish. And I talked to Randy, who did make the game and put it up on a Kickstarter, and I asked him, what is your plan after Kickstarter? And I said, wait, before you answer that, I think this is what most people's plans are. They have no plan after they run Kickstarter, and they print an extra 500 copies of the game, and then a year later, they have 500 copies left in their garage, and they're Christmas gifts for the next 20 years to all their friends. And he said, that's exactly right. A year ago, I made another game, and I have 500 copies in my garage. So then we worked something out with him, and then we took that game and published it traditionally, put it through distribution, and marketed it, and it turned into a pretty good-sized hit. So we haven't made a game on Kickstarter ourselves. So for Kickstarter, for us personally, as a company, I view Kickstarter as something, right? It's crowdfunding, and we don't need that resource for us. We can finance our own games, so I don't need to take your money and deliver you a game a year later. We can do that ourselves, so we're not using Kickstarter for that purpose. Also, it's slow, right? Like, I have to take all this time to build a campaign and manage a campaign, and that takes away bandwidth, and we have to run the campaign, then we have to fulfill it, and I have to send out, if it's successful, it could be thousands of individual packages to thousands of homes. That's really, really hard. And that's why a lot of times on Kickstarter, where Kickstarters sometimes go awry, is usually in that stage. That's the most difficult part of it, like Justin mentioned. Sending out thousands of packages to residential addresses is not easy, and it's very expensive. So we've decided that that's just not for us. We would rather focus our efforts on making games and getting them out. We have very good distribution partners, and our marketing is good, and we have a presence at shows. That said, where we miss out is on that direct consumer contact. So, I look at some guys that do a lot of stuff on Kickstarter, and I'm envious that they have a mailing list of 20,000 of their most dedicated and loyal fans. Like, that's awesome. I don't have that. Because my sales go through Travis, right? Like, he's selling to fans of my games, and that's awesome. But I'm missing out on that little piece of it. So that is the benefit that I think a company like ours would benefit from, but we don't need it for the true intent of Kickstarter, which is to crowdsource something and get something made that would not have gotten made otherwise. And in that sense, I do think Kickstarter is wonderful. There's a lot of people out there, and we've seen a lot of games because Kickstarter exists that we never would have seen otherwise. And I think at the end of the day, like, we're all better off for that, and I think that's good for us as gamers. So,
Tom, if I could get your opinion on Kickstarter.
All right, well, that could take a long time, right? There's so much good about Kickstarter. There are so many publishers upstairs right now who exist because of Kickstarter. How can that be a bad thing? Good publishers putting out good games who owe their complete existence to Kickstarter. I'm glad for that. Kickstarter definitely has the opportunity to do new and unusual things. Now, it often doesn't take advantage of that. You see the same old stuff on Kickstarter too, but there's some new and unique things that could not have been published elsewise. I think Gloomhaven is a good example. I doubt that would have been a very good straight to the retailer type thing. It just probably wouldn't have worked very well.
If that game was pitched to most publishers,
They'd say no.
They'd say no.
Yeah.
I'd say 99 point. Now you might say have some people, 20/20 hindsight say, oh yeah, I would have made that. Like, the truth is,
I think that answer is true down
Yeah.
to the retail level even.
So
Yeah,
you have
that's
this
probably accurate.
huge amount of choice. I was looking at the Kickstarters this past Tuesday. I was putting together a thing, and there was 363, I think, somewhere around that, of tabletop games on Kickstarter at that point in time. Now, take out 100 of them that are never going to be funded. They shouldn't be funded, whatever. There's still a lot of really good tabletop stuff that's coming out. And this is hard for the consumer because the burden is being put on the consumer, you guys, to buy these games before you know anything about them. So it's tough because you go by the previews there, which are all positive, and
No.
I know it's shocking.
you mean people don't post negative previews?
Right, but there really isn't a consumer reports or anything. When the game's published, the reviewers come and they're nice or they beat it up. It's one of those two. The Kickstarter is all positive. So you are guessing. You're going by the past things that company has done. And most of the time, when I went through and looked at all the projects, most of them was the first project. So you don't know any of that. So you go by, what does it give me? And Kickstarter has produced this thing where you expect to get so much stuff. Sometimes to the detriment of the company. If the Kickstarter is successful, they're like, oh, and you mentioned the shipping. They suddenly have to ship all that stuff to people or produce it. And many Kickstarters companies have gone out of business because they were too successful. And that's problematic. I mean, I think a lot of this I can trace back. I remember D-Day Dice, when it first came out, they offered so much. People said, look at all this I got for this amount of money. You weren't supposed to. And that caused the problem. And it causes industry-wide problems because then people look at established publishers and say, well, that stuff's not as good as this stuff is. And so that's, Mike said it's working its way out. It is. People are starting to realize that things aren't necessarily free. And it's just because you're going to get a ton of stuff, you're going to get it in 2026. Or it might not look nearly as good as those pictures did on Kickstarter. And those guys who did those previews might have been slightly wrong or paid or what have you. But so this is all working out, I think, as time goes by. And it's a lot better, I think, than it was a couple years ago. So I think overall it's good. It's just tough for the consumer because they're sitting there going, how do I know what to get? And I don't even know what to tell them because it's hard.
Absolutely. And Travis, finally, as a retailer voice, where are your thoughts on all this?
I love Kickstarter, which is strange to say as a retailer, right? We're pretty adaptable, we're pretty flexible, so anytime anything like that comes into the market space and it kind of throws things off and it puts pressure on publishers and other retailers and things like that, it's great for me because we'll figure it out, or we'll put a lot of assets into figuring it out quicker than most people do, and we'll kind of get front of the line. When Kickstarter kind of launched, there were a lot of my peers in the industry that were the vocal majority that screamed and hollered and had a real big fit about it, and I spent a lot of that time talking specifically with certain publishers about how they were doing things in a hope for a change in a way that they could make it so that it could be more of a partnership with a retailer as well. So we went about talking with the early people on how to look at doing a retail pledge and things like that, and that's adapted over the course of the last couple of years. But again, there's no real control put in that place. So everything's great as long as they're doing what I want them to do. But most of the time they're not. So now what we're seeing happen is there's some toxicity that we end up dealing with in that we'll have a great game that's wonderful and we'll buy all those excess 500 extra copies they have, and that'll get through distribution, it'll go to retail, we'll start selling them to the consumer, it's great, it's ready to go. And then when I've got a dozen of them on my shelf, the announcement for the second edition with the updated cards that they really should have done in the first place, that they promised to the backers that they couldn't do with the new expansion, put in the box for the same price and the quicker delivery time. And now I've got that old first edition one on my shelf. It's not like it doesn't have the same shelf life of I'm going to get 5 years out of D&D 5th edition, or I know when the Magic rotation's coming up. It's like I've got this great, wonderful dungeon crawl game on my shelf, and second edition's coming, and I've got 6 copies of them, and it's a $100 thing, and it sucks that it's there because I don't feel good selling it to a consumer when I know I've got another model coming down the street. And and then the other side of that is the publishers that are making the choice that they're not going to take it in through the channels, and I can't get a hold of the game as a retailer, so I don't even have the opportunity to curate the experience and sell good games to the consumers that I want to sell to at any price point. Not that I haven't done that. There have been times when I've bought games post crowdfunding and made no dollars on it to deliver it to a customer, because that's part of what I do. I'm not making any money, it's a service. But I wanted to have that game for that particular customer because they're an important customer in the ecosystem of my business. But anytime something comes through the channel like this increased digitization of board games and stuff, it's just an opportunity for me to adapt, to figure it out, to try to get better than what my peers are doing and be able to offer a better consumer experience. And that's the name of the game. I mean, without good consumers and without good publishers making good games, my shop's empty. And there's catastrophic successes. Things can go really, really, really well, and it could end up being terrible for you and terrible for me. Well, I sold out. Well, that's good, but I disappointed another 30 people, so I've lost that sale, and their expectations are higher, and their levels of enthusiasm go up. But at the same time, I've got a lot of Kickstarters in my closet that I pledged on, and when they came in, I was already well past the excitement that I had when all the stretch goals were coming up. So it's just boxed in the box that it came in, and I've never actually taken it out because, it was 9 months ago or whatever. So I've moved on to whatever the thing is that's actually in front of me that I'm playing today. So yeah, there's pluses and minuses for it. I don't have a giant problem with it. I'm just going to manage it the same way that I manage every other challenge that happens in our business. Sometimes it's going to work for me. Sometimes it isn't. It gives me an opportunity for some growth. It gives me an opportunity to provide customers with an experience they won't necessarily get at each store, so that's good, but it's not great for all my peers. So.
Nice. Thank you,
Rick, can
gentlemen.
I jump back in on one thing?
Absolutely, absolutely.
One of the things that I think Kickstarter's really enabled is it's a marketing engine. The fact of the matter is, I think that, as Scott alluded to, that direct contact has really been powerful. So one of the things that we've recommended to new companies that are looking at doing a Kickstarter, or a company that may be established in doing a Kickstarter, leverage that into that long tail. Leverage that. If you're doing stretch goals, you're doing a promo card as a stretch goal, don't just give the backer one, give them 3. But make sure they can only use 1 in the game themselves. Now you've got an alpha gamer who adapted early, who's going to want to play the game with somebody who's got a cool card to give to somebody else that buys the game. But the Kickstarter's over. So in order to play that cool card that Bob has to give, they've got to come to Travis and buy the game. And there's ways that can mesh together in a very powerful way and continue to expand the number of people that are aware of that game or just aware of the industry in general.
Yeah, to piggyback off of that a little bit, the metrics that Kickstarter gives me and the ability to look at what you guys actually want makes it a hell of a lot easier for me to order for a store. There's a lot of retailers that'll argue, and there's no denying it. The number of pledges there are potential sales that we could have gotten at retail, to a degree, right? We wouldn't necessarily have captured those all, and a lot of times it's much more exaggerated than retailers will tell you. They're like, there's 12,000 people that pledge that. There's no way possible. And it's like, if you click the community tab, there was only 4,000 in America. Okay, there's 4,000 game stores in America. That means you lost 1 potential sale. Were you going to sell more than one of those games? Okay, let's do some math here. That means you've got 5 left. And let's go from there. So all of that data is perfect data that I get that I don't get on anything else, even through the best marketing that I can get from the rest of publishing. So there is a good resource that's there. But then when the second edition stuff and the reprinting this comes through, then all that breaks down. It's a house of cards when it comes to that.
Could we ask a question? Could I ask a question?
Yeah, please.
Okay. How many people in the audience are thinking about publishing or self-publishing their own game and running a Kickstarter? Okay, so that's maybe 15, 20% of you. All right, so the number one thing I would tell you from my perspective, if I was to give you any advice, so we get pitched a lot of people's games that they've run on Kickstarter and now they need that next step. Do not create 2 versions of your game. The first thing I look at is you had a Kickstarter version that has exclusives that we can't put in the retail version, the conversation's over. Think about it this way. If you sell 2,000 copies on Kickstarter, your goal is to sell 20,000 copies after that. Who are those 18,000 people that want to buy the lesser version of your game? Right? But I see this so many times over and over and over again with good games where it's like, oh yeah, I put all this stuff in or upgrades or exclusive content in my Kickstarter version and I can't make those backers mad. Well, yeah, you made 2,000 people happy, but you just missed out on 18,000 other potential sales. So if that's like probably the biggest mistake I'm still seeing consistently made. I think it's getting better and better, but just don't do that.
And
even if you're gonna
extra content is not a problem.
Right.
And that's just as compelling as offering exclusive content to most of the backers, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, if you upgrade your game throughout the process and then you're left, this is the final product, that's awesome, but don't make it exclusive to your Kickstarter. Have it available, right? Like, you want to sell that game forever. That's everybody's goal. You want the next Ticket to Ride. If Ticket to Ride, the Kickstarter version of it, if the plastic trains were exclusive to the Kickstarter version and you only got paper trains in the retail version, I don't think anybody's going to get too excited about that.
That's a fact.
Yeah.
All right, so if you guys have any questions, please come up here, off to the side. Right here, I'll just have you talk right in the mic real quick.
Oh, she's got one.
Oh, we got a mic. Here we go. Perfect.
It's professional.
There. So
Let's get a hand for these
Testing.
guys that are running the event, because they put on... All of us do multiple events every year, and I have to say it's been the smoothest in every way. Thank you.
I've got a question and kind of like a statement. I've been in the gaming industry about 2 years. As far as my first hook was Lords of Waterdeep. And I just got hooked on it, and then she's starting to talk about the Dice Tower, and says, who the hell are these people? So I start watching the Dice Tower, and now I'm actually looking at getting into the gaming industry is self-publishing a store. But the whole thing that I stopped by, and we've actually gone to a lot of other stores to look to see what they've done, and I noticed 2 things. One, if you go into Toys R Us, I don't see a lot of the games. that, that you see on the different websites and the different stuff, especially games, geek.com. But what I want to know is I'm looking for the future of what the game industry is going to be to open up the store and to self-publish. But also I want to hear from you guys is how are you going to break through to the common person on understanding that there is a whole bit of game industry out there that nobody is aware of, because it's almost like it's a game underground, because if you look at a lot of the other stores, they're off on the beaten path. So unless you know they're there, you're never going to see them.
Who wants to start with that? Me?
I don't.
What's the future of gaming? I don't know. I'll check my shelves.
We'd be riding limos if we knew
Exactly.
So-
My crystal ball's broken.
So there's an immense amount of pressure from brick and mortar retail to be able to bring that kind of experience to customers right now, because let's be realistic. There is a large consumer base, myself included, that's price conscious, right? So a lot of people want the delivery of a brick and mortar store to look like this ivory palace. Well, if we could charge what the cheapest price is that you can get a game available, those things are incongruent. I cannot offer a magnificent gaming experience and be able to do it on margins that don't afford me to be able to pay a reasonable amount for staff, have a nice play space. How do we do it in our store? There's a bunch of different areas that we have that other places don't have. So to speak to the price-conscious consumer, we buy and sell used games. We have a large sale table that's consistent, that cycles out titles that are slower moving. And in our store right now, we've got 11 demo tables. Those get rotated monthly. So every consumer, average consumer comes in every 37 days in our store. We rotate those games monthly. There's 11 games. I have a staff meeting. All my staff gets trained on all of those games. So it's a brand new experience every time you walk in the store. So we can tour guide you through it. It's a 3 to 5 minute pitch on each of those. You spend an hour in the store, I'll show you all those games. All those games are available. So we flip those, and they vary in price, they vary in category, they vary in publisher. Sometimes one publisher gets all of our tables for a month. Usually the ones that do a really good job helping us out during Tabletop Day, they get a month on those tables.
Did you get all his tables in for a month? I did.
Scott got all my tables for a month. Simon got all my tables for a month. So the benefit to that too is from my store, all my employees are that educated, right? So if I have an employee that's with me for a year, that's 11 times 12, which doesn't seem like a lot of games in the grand scheme of things, but they're top games. They're games that I picked specifically to go on that table to show to consumers to curate. So that helps get past that. Like, there's a ton of people that are coming in that have no idea. So what do? We do marketing and outreach in Facebook and advertisements, and we go out into the community and host events and things like that to bring them in. But that's a lot of legwork, and a lot of times it's gratis. That's sweat equity stuff. You know, we don't go into the local church or Boy Scout group and pitch games for 3 hours and show them in demo and help them with their game design board, the badge and things like that. There's equity that we get for that by going out in the community and doing those kind of things, but it isn't seen overnight, right? It's something that we've had to work at. So there's a lot of things that we can do on the brick and mortar end to kind of bridge that gap. As far as those big box stores not having those games on the shelves, they're all based on sales data points. So they end up having my greatest hits, which I still sell, but the experience that I'm curating for the consumer is based on the quality that I see. So I'll spend most of my convention up at first look, figuring out what I'm gonna have for the future on my shelves.
One of the things I've always said about the industry is we don't sell a box, we sell the experience.
Yep.
And that's the biggest thing I'll give you on both sides of that coin is you're selling an experience of you sitting down at the table and playing with her, of family coming together. And if you keep that focus on the way you handle your social media marketing, the way you handle your marketing, the way you handle your game design, that's I think the first key is understanding you're not selling a commodity, you're selling an experience.
I don't necessarily believe in this whole great unwashed masses, people not playing games and we need to worry about that. I don't care. I know that sounds heartless, but like my dad doesn't want to play games, I don't care. I'll do something else with my dad. I want to grow the hobby. I don't think everyone on earth needs to play games. The hobby is growing at phenomenal rates anyway, and it's going to get done. And if my dad wants to play Ticket to Ride and complain the whole time that he's not rolling dice like Monopoly, so I'm going to give up, and I'm just going to play Monopoly with him. You know, that's okay because it's that same experience. And I think sometimes we worry too much about that sort of thing. If people are playing and having a good time together, hooray. I'm just excited about that.
Well, and the numbers have grown exponentially, right? Like, just in the last what were your YouTube subscriber numbers 3 years ago? I know what they are. I want to see if you know.
60,000.
Yes. Yeah, 60. And you're at what now?
170.
Right. So in 3 years, that's not coming from people that have been hardcore gamers for 30 years, 20 years. Those are new people coming.
That's coming from people that asked,
Right.
6 months ago, what the heck's that website?
But they still say that.
Okay, so you're trying to get a game to market, and now that we've got this amazing amount of choice, what do you find is the most, what's the pinnacle for that market strategy? What's going to make the biggest difference? Is it like, we've got Scythe came out, and I feel like that was all about the art and the developer. I feel like games are coming out that are pushing a new theme or the legacy game concept. What is it you think that is most important to get a game noticed, to stand out from the crowd?
I want to hear what WizKids is going to do.
So WizKids was born out of kind of Jordan Weissman's dream of innovating, doing something different and differentiating the product. So I don't think there's one right answer to that question. I don't think it's have different art or have a new theme or a new direction. I think it's any of those things. I believe the market's kind of commoditized to some degree. Everything looks like everything else. It's very derivative. Where you see the standouts are the guys that are doing it different, the guys or girls that are doing it different. The best art, the best gameplay, something we haven't seen before. And that's the game that we look for. Something different, something that ordinary people would say, there's no way we can do this. We then, instead of surrendering to that no way we can do this, we take some time, just like Travis does, and thinks, instead of complaining about it and getting upset about it, we spend our time trying to figure out, well, how could we do this? And that might mean doing things differently. Just change the norm of what we thought was possible.
Scythe had so many things that rolled into it, right? There's a lot of different touch points that they had specifically. Jamie's very eloquent, just well-respected, has a great business perspective. There's retailer buy-in for him. There was a little scarcity in the market. That was great for Brick-and-Mortar. As the game cyclically released to different reprint cycles, all of the rest of us that were selling it, that could get our hands on it at Brick-and-Mortar, were doing really well with that title. The game was good. There was good depth to it. It didn't take a lot to learn. The artwork was very different. The replayability was high. There was another expansion kind of close to after the core set. But look at what we're talking about, though. We're talking about one game that we picked out that had this exceptional situation. And that's what we run into for challenges now. Like, in any given year, it used to be pretty easy for me to take a look at 12 to 30 games and go, these are definitely going to be consistent sellers for the next 12-month cycle. I don't have to worry about them. I always want them on my shelf. It just doesn't happen anymore. We've gotten to the point where they're consumable almost to comic book levels now. They'll come in my door, they're there for 30 days, they're hot, and then we've moved on to the next layer of it. So evergreens are really, really hard to do. We're seeing 3 a year, maybe 4 a year. They just don't hold like they used to because there's so much come.
Yeah. I would say you need to hit all those things that you mentioned. Yep. You need to have first of all, you have to have a good game. It has to be high quality art. You need high production values.
The right price point.
The right price point. You also, if your game is successful, sometimes, I think this is Justin's term that he coined, like catastrophic success. Your game takes off and people want it, and then 6 months later you can get the second printing out. It's really a big risk. By that, you've lost your momentum, and there's been 100 other games that have come out that are just as awesome.
And at the same time, you can bury yourself if then on that second wave you made too many of them. If there isn't just a little touch of scarcity out there, then what happens is it all gets gobbled up elsewhere, and there's not enough people talking about it on demo tables. So they're not creating that next wave. So when the new consumer comes in looking for the new hotness, and that's in that situation, it's already gone. You've already moved into the one that came out that month.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
I have two questions, one short, one longer. what is your opinion on diversification of brick-and-mortar stores? That being said, like game and cafe or game and other. That's the first question. And the second question is, where, I'm sure people of your caliber have certain things like playtesting where you have designated people, but where would indie gamers or indie designers or people who are just starting out get a good amount of people that could test their game reliably?
Can I do the second part
Yeah,
first?
you can-
It's a really easy answer. So there's a network of events called Unpubs and Protospiels. So Unpubs are phenomenal. They're really well done. You go there, you get a table. Like the biggest one is actually right here in your backyard. It's in Baltimore every spring. It's in April. 500 people come in and play prototypes all weekend and give you a tremendous amount of feedback. It is the best thing as a up-and-coming game designer that you could do, is attend those events and let people that you don't know play your game.
Yes.
Because when you're play testing your game with all your friends and family, it's in a bubble, and everybody thinks everything's awesome. And go out there and let strangers play your game. And then also Sen did a talk at Proto-TO I was at a couple months ago, and his talk was on how to receive feedback and how to process that feedback. Don't be defensive, take the feedback. People might not understand things, they might hate it. Be open to it all and take it, and then go home and process it, and then start over. And just keep working kind of that craft. But Proto-TO is in Toronto, Unpubs are all over the country, and Protospiels are all over the country. Just Google it and you'll find their website.
So board game cafes sound like a pretty easy thing to do. You've got some board games, people like to sit down and play, and then you make some food and some coffee for them, and it's a piece of cake. I'm about an hour and a half from Snakes and Lattes. My friend Gary Sproul runs the Haunted Game Cafe. Eric Widener runs Emerald Tavern. I know the folks from Mox. These are great establishments, and I think over the last couple of years you probably saw a number of Kickstarters for board game cafes. And you might have saw some follow-up Kickstarters for Save Our Board Game Cafe. Because it seems like it's a piece of cake. Well, I like board games and I like food, but there's two separate businesses there. There's the restaurant business that's demanding, and restaurants
the single business
are
that
on the
closes
highest,
the most.
It closes
Yep.
the most, and it's on the highest rise right now in the country. Look it up. Forbes just had a big article on it.
Yep.
There's more restaurants because when the economy is good, nobody wants to cook their own food. They want to have somebody else do it for them. So the quality of food that you have to have is higher than it's ever been in that category. The other side of that is when my business partner and I were thinking about doing it, we realized something that was pretty simple to us. If I own a bar or I own a restaurant already and it's successful and I want to do games, I just announce Tuesday's game night. Those people bring their games in and they play. If I want to go the other side of that, I got to figure out this restaurant business, and I got to bring somebody else in, and they got to do it right, and it's got to be more than sandwiches, and it can't be this. And then
Layer of
my social media is getting beat up on two sides of things. Well, they don't have the games I want, and their paninis are terrible, So like you just open yourself, and then I think there's another degree of it too, where there's a fad element to it in that it sounds in my opinion, I think most of the people when they do these cafes, the thing that they're making the biggest mistake on is turnover time. You can't have a board game cafe with the expectation that Twilight Imperium is what's going to be played, because you need those tables to turn just like a normal restaurant as well, because you need to make that money from those other things. So I think if they focused a little bit more on shorter time games that they sold at the table, I think it would be a better thing. And it's one of those things right now where I think a lot of people are going to close a lot of game store cafes because they don't understand what it really takes to do that model. 70% of coffee is sold before 7 a.m. Okay, if I take that into place and I'm not willing to open my game store cafe that sells coffee at 6 a.m., then I'm missing out on a lot of sales on high margin stuff like coffee.
You mean gamers don't get up early in the
They
morning?
never get up that early. So I think it's great right now, just like the number of escape rooms that anybody with a broom closet now has an escape room. Awesome, great. Same thing, everybody with an idea for a board game can make a Kickstarter. There's a winnowing that will end up occurring, and there's going to end up being some good cafes that are also good game stores that are going to stay there. Most of them are going to have high dollar financing and are going to look like good spaces. And just like anything else, while there's nice looking game stores and there's exceptional looking game stores and there's not great looking game stores, the same thing can happen with, you know, a board game cafe as well. So it seems well intentioned and easy to do, but it's really, really hard.
So before this next question, another add on to that. If anybody's considering doing anything like that because you're a fan of board games or a fan of coffee, pick up a book called The E-Myth and The E-Myth Revisited. Read that book because it's going to maybe save your life.
The E-Myth. I'm going to order it on Amazon right now.
Hi, thank you for this great panel. I was curious, when you guys started, you all kind of felt like we had an agreement that 2018 was going to be kind of the plateauing of this thank you. What they said, rise of board games. So I was kind of curious with the consolidation of publishers, now the consolidation some of distribution, but with news and marketing still really being decentralized. We have a couple big pillars, but that, you know, as you mentioned, some people still say, what's that dice tower? How you're preparing as publishers and as people selling the games and moving the games to not be part of what gets cut, and kind of what you think that looks like as things plateau, kind of the big consolidated publishers, how they do versus more of our Kickstarter people.
I just want to clarify that they might have said about plateauing in 2018. I think 2018 is still going to grow. I think the plateau is going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen next year, because if it did, it'd be a pretty quick shift. We're not seeing it happening at the end of 2017, so I don't see why it would happen in 2018. If it did, it would be the very, very end.
Yeah, I actually don't. I don't think that. So I think maybe when you hear some of us saying like a plateau or even like some shifts, it's really, I don't think, my opinion anyways, it's not on the consumer level. The consumer level is going to continue to grow. It might not grow at the same velocity that it's been growing. Like I do think 2018 will be really strong, but at some point, like it's going to slow down. You know, just some things just aren't sustainable at a certain level forever. I think, at least from my perspective, the bubble, for lack of a better term, has really been kind of like on the publisher end. You know, so on one hand, we talked about Kickstarter earlier. Kickstarter is a wonderful thing, but Kickstarter is also, you know, a big part of why there's another 500 games or 1,000 games on the market in any given year. You know, and of course, more publishers, everybody's publishing games, you know, guys like WizKids are jumping on board and stuff like that. Right, but it just adds to it. Like our catalog has grown, like we're guilty of it as well. Like we put out 12 games last year. This year we're putting out over 20. So it's just more games on the market, and that is the end. That's the side I think that, I don't want to speak for everybody, but I think that isn't sustainable, and it does need to.
The release velocity is what I think, not necessarily sales dollars through the industry, but there is a bubble on the release velocity that I think is going to self-correct.
Absolutely.
So you're not seeing it. You won't see a lack of growth in board games. What you're going to see is there's a softening of other market conditions right now in the industry, and it's going to take out a lot of retailers, and it might take out some suppliers, and it might take out some publishers because of the way to manage dollars. You know, I'm my inventory a lot of times. This is the first time in 17 years that I've run a Black Friday sale, and I have to run a Black Friday sale because I've got too many games. And I've never had to do that. And the games that I'm selling, and I'm selling at a discount, and some of them at a significant discount, are really, really good games. They're games that should have sold through, and for whatever reason they didn't. On some of them I certainly over-ordered, but it was an appropriate order based on that. And what's going to happen is some of my peers that have less deep pockets, or they don't have the flexibility or maybe the recognition of slow-turning inventory, they're going to look at their books in January and go, I can't make rent. What's going on? Why do I have this dusty stock? How is this going to move? And they don't have demo tables to then try to move those things and churn that product that's a little bit slower maybe, or put it in front of more eyes and stuff. So I think what you're going to see is not maybe a lack of releases. You're going to see a more damaged and a more softer base to bring eyes to games.
Hi, so 2 quick questions. First one is, in other industries, a lot of times you'll see products find success because they take what someone else has already done and they make it better. Does this hold true for the board game industry, whether that be with like artworks, theme, or mechanics? Or does that fall into more of the side of like player fatigue with those things? And my other question, which is somewhat unrelated, but what, across the panel here, across the industry, what is your opinion of the game crafter?
I can, the first part, so I do think that like new categories are created all the time. Well, not all the time, but when they're created, it's like deck building, for example, right? Dominion came on the scene, it created deck building, and then, in my opinion, more deck builders came out later that have done it better. So taking something that was a totally original innovation and then doing it better happens all the time. But I think that's different. Innovating and taking things to the next level are different than taking somebody's design and cloning it. Right. That's different, and that's not right. Like, I can't tell you, like, I get pitched clones of our own games all the time. It's the weirdest thing,
But
you
you
know.
like them.
Oh, I love, yeah, I mean, you know, but, no, but I'm saying, but some people don't necessarily see the difference. You know, taking somebody else's game and just skinning it to make it your own, it's not really the same thing.
It's lanterns, but it's about goblins.
Right.
You want to be first or best
Yeah.
in gaming, because the first in every genre is almost always, you mentioned Dominion.
Yeah.
I still don't think another deck builder has come close to it in sales, I'm guessing.
I don't know.
Not
Sorry,
taking
I don't
out
know.
dice and all, it's just deck
Yeah.
building.
No.
But there have been others that have been successful because they are better.
Or they've done something different
Subjectively,
or
I guess.
new.
Right, yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Well, and talking on the innovation, you can't get much more old school as far as a game than Risk. Okay, Risk was old school, and it's been done a million different times, million different ways, million different settings. But throw Legacy on top of it, it birthed a whole new genre of gaming.
Yeah.
So I do think there's room for those innovations as long as they're innovations that point towards a new way to play, a new way to encounter, not just a thin skin, but something
Right.
truly unique.
Tom's right, though. Primacy speaks, right? So if we look at Dominion as an example, like you look at Magic, right? I certainly don't think it's the best card game that was ever made. Their sales will tell me I'm wrong. But I've played much better, more immersive experience card games than that. I've played better miniature games than Warhammer. I've played better role-playing systems than Dungeons & Dragons. But those are the primes, and the primes will always continue as long as the, sorry, 4th edition, as long as the brand is stewarded in a way where it does really well, then there's no space for anything else. But yeah, there's always going to be people that are going to take that and run with it, thankfully, right? We'd get bored if that was all we had for options.
So we're
All
running
right.
out of time.
Yeah, we are running out of time, so if you had any questions, please feel free to go to their different platforms on their social media. Ask them there. I'm sure they'll get back to you on it with a good answer. That goes for anybody here. If you have any questions for anybody up on the panel that didn't get to or didn't get answered today, find us all on social media, ask the questions there, and I'm sure everybody will get back to you in some fashion. All right?
Do you have time for one more?
I have time for one more thought and question,
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
And that question is, so with great power comes great responsibility. Everybody up here has a
you
certain
just
level of
write
power. I've heard it somewhere. I might have a background in comic
Write
books
that
in some
His Uncle
regard.
Ben told
So
him that.
each of
It's
you,
Voltaire,
each of you up here on the
actually.
panel, and everybody in this audience has, you know, a certain amount of power when it comes to the success of this industry. Given your positions and that power, what responsibilities do you feel you shoulder when it comes to the future success of the board game industry? I'm going to start with Travis.
Gosh. So I'm also the chairperson for the Gamma Retail Division, which is about 500 retailers nationwide. So we put on a show in Reno every year, and I'm responsible for putting together a block of education that's 54 hours of panels to teach them how to be better retailers so that they can offer a better consumer experience to all of you. I manage a couple of social media groups behind closed doors that talk about increased communication between publishers and retailers and figuring out what's going to work so that we can bring better games to consumers. And there's a lot of legwork that I do behind the scenes in an attempt to make the retail experience better for consumers across the country. So there's a lot of stuff that I end up having interactions with people so that they can, my personal gain on that is pretty minimal when somebody calls me from Idaho and wants to know how to run organized play better. But there's, you know, the game industry as a whole has offered me a life that I couldn't have dreamed of. So there's a certain amount of me having to give back to continue to grow. But as far as what do I do for consumers is I try to give them a place where they can come to get away from the doldrums of their day-to-day life and to open up a box and experience something. And one of my best customers came in the other day and said, you know, it's the best I get to come to the store and shop here, and it's the best 2.5 hours I get with my family. I go home, my wife gets off her iPod, my kid comes down from his Xbox, we clean the bills off the table, we sit down for 2.5 hours and we play board games. And as a guy who's an uneducated guy from the middle of nowhere in New York, to be able to bring that experience to the American family, I'm not going to be able to do better than that in my living. So that's what I bring.
From my end, I look at it, the pace of everything's quickening, the pace of game releases, the pace of development, the pace of funding, the pace of all of it. And from our end, we're just trying to, going into 2018, increase the pace of the information flow to keep consumers aware. Game Trade Media, Game Trade Magazine, we're just trying to make sure that we're getting the information to the end consumers so that they're asking stores about it, so that we get feedback to these guys on what to print, and just increasing the pace of that communication cycle.
Tough question, but from my side, I think set aside sometimes your competitive natures as companies and work together. Scott and I work together on a lot of stuff. I talk to Travis every week. We work very closely with Mike and try to deliver the best possible product with honest, honorable relationships through the channel. And, let the products live or die by your choice.
Yeah, no, I agree. I would say for us, so first and foremost, right, it's our responsibility to put out a product that we're proud of and that our customers will be happy with. If we don't do that, ultimately we failed and we will fail. For me personally, so this is my 21st year making a living in the game industry full time. So I feel a certain responsibility to give other people a chance. So I sit in 200 game pitches probably a year with a lot of first-time designers, and that's part of the reason why I do it is I want to find the next brilliant thing, but also I want to give people a chance that might not have otherwise gotten a chance. And I do apologize if you've contacted me for a pitch. I get about 1,000 requests for game pitches, and I only do about 200 a year. So, but the third thing, I think that we have a lot of responsibility, especially on the publishing end, because we're very forward-facing and consumer-facing, is to kind of set a tone for the community. We've talked a lot today about how fast the community is growing, and with super fast growth comes a little bit of growing pains as well. And I think everybody in the room would agree that we want the community to grow because we want more gamers, right? We want more people to play games with. But sometimes the game community can be a little cliquish, right? Like we can be a little bit tough to break into. And I think it's partially our responsibility to create that welcoming culture where people feel welcome and safe to come in and play games with us and not be intimidated by what is, kind of a niche-y geek industry. It can be a little intimidating when you're on the outside. So that's something that I think flows down and throughout the industry is kind of creating that culture and maintaining it. So.
Yeah, I was going to say community also. The people I'm inviting over for Thanksgiving are my game group. I was in the store asking who wanted to come. Those are the people I wanted to hang out with. But more so than that, just, the community, we occasionally disagree in the industry. You definitely, you just have to look online to see that. And everyone disagrees, and there's so many things. But when the community comes together, this is very near and dear to my heart. This week was the Jack Vasel Memorial Fund, and everyone in the industry, it seems, gets involved in that. And if they don't, that's fine. There's so many other things, Child's Play, and so many other great things. But I see this stuff happening firsthand. And you guys don't see the letters, because I can't always share them, because it's personal, from people who are helped by these things. And that is an amazing thing, right? And that happened because of the community of board gamers. And we don't always talk about that, but I think we need to push that more often. And, sometimes I see the Xbox versus PlayStation battles, and I laugh at them, When we get into that sort of stuff, too, sometimes, right? This versus that. But when it comes down to it, you're the nicest people I know. And it's really helped me out, and it helps out a lot of other people. And I think community is really important.
Here. Awesome. Thank you, gentlemen. Let's give a round of applause for our panelists. I'd like to thank everybody for coming in and being a part of the panel up here, and everybody coming in and watching. My challenge to you as you leave here, play a game with someone you haven't played a game with this weekend. Sit down at a game table with someone you don't even know. Play a game, and play a game you haven't played, and enjoy PAX Unplugged. Have a great weekend, everybody.